We are live. Hey, you guys. It is Lisa Alexander, founder of Stand Up Survivor. And tonight we have the founder of Defend Survivors, Paula Goodwin, with us. She is a child sexual abuse advocate. Hey, Paula.
Hi, how are you?
Doing good. Take two, right? We made
it. We did it.
We did it anyway. So we are definitely two women who are going to persevere. So go ahead and hop on in here. Go ahead and share it, please, with people who need to see it. She is an advocate for childhood sexual abuse, domestic violence, and sexual assault. So Paula, we're going to just dive right in. I know you're ready. So tell us a little bit about yourself and like why you decided to start this work.
Okay, well, several years ago, it was actually 2015, my daughter disclosed abuse when she was doing a intake interview for school counseling. And that led us into the justice system. Okay. So, that night I got a call from the police detective and they asked us to come into a children's advocacy center the next day. And what happened from there was just shocking to me on what actually happens when a child does report abuse. It was nothing what I expected. It was just, I really thought, if a child disclosed something that heinous, that, the best of the best come in and they're obviously taken care of. And what I found out after that was shocking. So what I found out eventually from the advocates at the Advocacy Center was that their estimate of how many cases were prosecuted was 1% to 2%.
1 to 2% of childhood sexual assault cases are tried.
Go to prosecution, not even prosecuted necessarily, but they go to prosecution. So into it, and then it is going to be sent to prosecution. So that was 1% to 2% are going to be sent to prosecution. My daughter's counselor said out of 150 children that she had treated for the last 3 years, that 3 of those children had their cases go to prosecution. And I think 2 of them had a confession.
So what happens to the other 150? What happens to the rest of the cases?
They're dropped. They don't even get fingerprinted most of the time. They're dropped.
That is unbelievable.
It was unbelievable. And, I've talked about this before, that honestly, I really thought that they were just appeasing me and just trying to make me feel better but with my daughter and telling me that. It's just like, who's going to believe that? Who can even comprehend that? It just doesn't make sense to me that would be true. And so we actually met with the prosecutor in my daughter's case. And that was one of the worst experiences of either of our lives.
Wow. Why was that?
And so she just was very dismissive of me, very dismissive of my daughter. She told me all kinds of things that I knew weren't true from just my own research and from what the advocates were telling me. Yeah. So it was just the most demoralizing meeting I've ever had.
Wow. That number is not only unacceptable, it's not unbelievable, it's unacceptable to think that only 1% to 2% of cases actually go to prosecution. So there's tons of children who have exposed that they have been sexually abused and nothing has been done about it.
Right. And that's the whole point. We're trying to bring children in. So the whole point of bringing them in is to stop the abuser and to protect them and to help them. We're doing one side of that. We're helping the children. The advocacy centers are amazing and do a great job helping the children and getting counseling for them and getting anything that they need. But we're not doing the other side of it and stopping the perpetrator. And that directly affects the child's healing with what they go through. So they were telling me this and, I just couldn't believe it. So I started researching it. And I was actually finishing my degree at the time. My bachelor's degree in training and development. And so I did my capstone paper on training and development in child sexual abuse cases. I researched it. And what I found just confirmed everything that they had told me. It wasn't just our advocacy center. It wasn't just our state, our town. It was nationwide. It's actually worldwide. I've had so many people I talk to now on social media, and it's a problem everywhere. It's a problem in Australia. It's a problem in the UK. It's a problem literally everywhere. But what I found in the United States, though, was as I did the research, I found a paper that was written in 2004 by a child abuse expert named Victor Veith. And he said that the majority of cases will not be prosecuted because they will not prosecute unless there is direct DNA evidence.
Wow. So
Search further.
without direct DNA evidence, they're saying that they're not willing to prosecute.
No, and that's what our prosecutor said, that her criteria for prosecuting was either a confession, DNA evidence, or a witness. And I mean, obviously, in child sexual abuse cases, you don't usually have any of those things.
Yeah, like any of the three that you mentioned don't even sound like you're probably going to get them.
No, you're not going to find those in the majority of cases. The majority of cases are delayed reporting, and anybody that follows child sexual abuse, we know that they don't usually report right away. There's obviously not going to normally be a witness. The few cases that they do where somebody has confessed, and even the ones with a confession, they're likely going to get a reduced sentence because they confessed, and a lot of them are cut down to a misdemeanor, and we see it in the news all the time where somebody's given probation or just a minimal sentence.
Okay, so that's just mind-blowing. This is not my area at all, so I'm learning as everyone else is while we're watching, and that's just mind-blowing to me that's just even an acceptable thing. So right. I confess, so I get off less. It's so no wonder children don't want to say anything about being abused, because right. They're not necessarily going to be believed. And even if they are believed, there's nothing's going to happen to the perperbiter. They're right. back out on the street.
Right, exactly. You know how many people see this? Word gets around in the town if a child reports. It gets around if a cousin's being abused too. The cousins watch. Everybody watches when something like this happens. They know, what happens. So, I did further research on it, and what I found out was that nationally, that 29% of child sexual abuse reports result in an arrest, and that number drops to 19% the younger the child is. So if they're under 6 years old, the number drops to 19%. So it gets less the younger they are. And wow. The statistics show that a large majority of the children that do come in are under 6 years old, which is
wow.
But so 19 to 29% result in an arrest. That's it. Just fingerprinted. We're not talking about, they have a 97%, less than 3% get convicted.
So we're arresting 19 to 29%, but not even a percentage of those are actually getting convicted for their crime. Right. To me, I mean, and forgive me if this sounds crazy, but it's like a license to continue to do what they're doing. There's no punishment. That's ludicrous.
No, and that's the consequence of it. People say, "Oh, that's get justice." Everybody knows how the justice system works, and so they're like, "Oh, that's sad that they didn't get justice." But there's repercussions to that. There's consequences. Yeah. You're not just clearing an abuser, you're vindicating them. They can then go out and say that they were wrongfully accused, and you're just giving them a license, like you said, to go and abuse more, because they know they're not going to get caught. They know what the statistics are.
That is horrible.
Happen. And children get put back in care of the abuser too. Is a horrific consequence. The Advocacy Center where we are, they put the handprints on the wall when there's a confirmed case. That's the other thing. These cases are highly investigated. It's not like they just meet them one time and then say, okay, it's confirmed. They do a huge investigation on each case. The Advocacy Centers are so well prepared. They bring the children in. They have this specific training for the people that do the forensic interviews. These are highly investigated before they're ever confirmed true. So they put the handprint on the wall of the children that have the confirmed cases. And the handprints are all over the Advocacy Center.
Wow.
Up and down, it's just overwhelming when you walk in, how many children, their handprints. They're in the bathroom, they're in the offices, they're all over the place. And sometimes the Advocacy Centers will put signs up next to the handprints that kind of tell the story of that handprint of that child. And one of the handprints had a sign next to it that said, "Maybe next time my grandfather will believe me."
Oh, man.
And then the advocates have told me that some of the handprints are the same. They just get bigger as they keep trying to tell.
Oh, my goodness.
So I'm hearing all of this, and I just kept researching. The same thing with you. I was just like, this can't be true.
Yeah.
It just can't be true. But the more and more I heard about it, it just kept being confirmed. And so my question was, why is nobody talking about this?
Yeah.
It's the way it is. Why is nobody talking about this? Those children are walking in, they're taking the ultimate risk to go against their abuser, to walk in there and say their abuser's name. this is what's happening to them.
And I think that's one of your first posts that caught my eye when you said, if survivors and victims are willing to tell their story, we should be bold enough to listen to them and talk about it too.
That's right.
It takes a lot of strength for them to even be able to say it. I mean, especially for a child, especially for a child, and then to find out that they're not believed. It's just, and then you mentioned earlier, they're not believed. And so that affects their healing process.
Right. Right. And you can say, the people that will bring them in, they'll say, we believe you. There's just not enough evidence. You can tell a child that, but, my daughter has written about this, and, it was her writings that spurred all of this, because after we met with the prosecutor, she wrote a paper for our advocacy center to use to try and explain how it affects the child. And she titled it, "It's Not Your Crime." And she, in very detailed way, goes through the mind of the child. And she was older when she wrote this, but she could write it through the mind of the child. And it was that paper that I read it, and I would never have known that a lot of the things that she was thinking is what she was thinking. And
wow.
And what she's thinking, I've heard so many other survivors say the same things. You don't know what this child is thinking. That, when they get done and the advocates have helped them and they're so grateful, and they take their little teddy bear and they smile and say thank you and they walk out the door, but you don't know what's really going on in their head, what they're thinking. And, one of the things that she wrote that was just devastating to me is that she became a new person, that she became somebody that tries to get people in trouble.
Wow. Yeah, that is
they think. Yeah. They're a little child, and they think you tried to get somebody in trouble.
Yeah, instead of just believe her.
They also go home and they worry. They go home and they worry that, who the abuser's hurting now, because they couldn't stop them. They constantly worry about, if they're going to see their abuser's truck somewhere. You just don't really know what goes on in the mind of the child and how much this affects them. I've heard so many other children say similar things. Survivors, as they've gotten older, have said the same thing, that they worry too about the next child, who was, even if they are protected from them, who the next child is that they're hurting.
Wow. Yeah, that's a lot to carry. So let me just ask you a question. As a mother who heard her daughter share and reveal that she was being sexually assaulted, how would you encourage other mothers? What would you encourage other mothers who are feeling the same way? Their child may have come to them and said that. What do you think how should they respond to that? What do they do with that information?
They need to just 100% believe them. I'm not going to lie. It's hard no matter what. It's just a devastating thing to hear. It's just a devastating thing to go through. But, like we said a minute ago, if they're strong enough to survive it, we can be strong enough to talk about it.
Yeah.
We can be strong enough to be there and support them through it. One of the most devastating things I hear from survivors is that they weren't believed. It's a common refrain. And you hear this all over. People respond to me on social media, and they'll say, I wasn't believed by my own mother. I wasn't believed by my own father, by, teacher. You can put whatever you want in that. I wasn't believed by them. And to me, that's just the most devastating thing that can happen. So what I try to tell parents is, what your child tells you is probably going to sound unbelievable. That's what they wants.
Right.
Wants it to sound unbelievable. They purposely abuse in ways that people are going to go, oh, that can't happen. That couldn't be. They purposely do that. And so, what I tell everybody is that, your understanding of what happened may come over time and with education, but the child not being believed is devastating to them. And it's, the damage done to them is immediate, and it may be irreparable. So no matter what, you believe your child. And then also you get yourself to a children's advocacy center.
Okay, yeah, that was my next question for you. So after they say, okay, I believe you, now what do I do? Because I know, especially in the culture that I grew up in, it was like, you don't say anything. What happens in the house stays in the house. Oh, well, it's a secret. It's a thing. We'll take care of it within the family, and not realizing the devastating effects that can have on the victim.
Right. No, and I hear that all the time. So many people say, we're going to keep this to ourselves. We're not going to bring shame on the family or something like that, which is just horrific. This is a child that's been hurt. Nothing takes precedence over that. You take care of the child.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things I've learned is that you get to a children's advocacy center. One of the best things I had was a children's advocacy center that was able to look me and explain everything to me. Then I went off and did my own research. But, I had them. And so when that prosecutor was telling me these crazy things, I was like, I'd already had the advocates educating me and backing up what Sarah had said.
Right.
And, I didn't have that problem of listening to what that prosecutor was telling me and believing her, because I had already had these other people that were educating me. So I hope everybody has a children's advocacy center in their towns. What I've been told is that not every case goes to a children's advocacy center.
Okay.
I always tell parents, no matter, you get your child to the children's advocacy, you demand that they be taken to a children's advocacy center.
So what if they're afraid and they're like, well, it's my boyfriend or my uncle, or I'm afraid that I'm going to get in trouble if I report what happened to my child?
Yeah, well, that's a real concern, because if a mother does report and they're in the middle of a custody case, then they have a high chance of losing the abuser. Which, like I said, there's so many things that need to be worked on with this. There's not easy fixes, but at the point your child tells you that, there's just no question you report it. You go try to get them protected. So
yeah, I love that. I love the immediacy in what you're talking about. You're like, your child has been in danger. Something is wrong. Let's get them help right away. It's a 911 situation. They need that help. Because what we have to realize is that what's happening with a child at that age, it's forming them for the rest of their life. So it's so important that that it's dealt with in that immediate time, and that they're believed.
Right, and the sooner the better. As soon as you find something out, you have to go report it, and then you can get to the advocates, and you can get to they're the experts. And what you just said, the emergencies. I call the Children's Advocacy Center the emergency service for child abuse. That's what they're there for. They are there, and they are ready, and they're set, and they're ready to go. And it's all done our advocacy center looks like you walked into Candyland. Done in the most wonderful, child-friendly environment. And you're going to, I wrote a blog about children's advocacy centers, and I said, they're experts in child abuse, but they're also experts in kindness. You're not going to find, they employ the best people.
Did you find that you needed your own counseling, or you needed your own help to deal with what your child experienced?
Oh, yes, definitely. And that's the other thing you've got to do. You got to find, I had a mentor that, as soon as I had dealt with what I needed to deal with, I went and immediately called her. And then I had my own counseling. Also, you definitely have to get support for yourself so that you can have your head above water to help your child deal with it. But, in the midst of all of this is like all that was going on. And then in the midst of all that, I'm hearing these crazy things that, it took 7 months for them to tell us that her case would not be prosecuted. Like 2 months for them to even bring him in to question him. In the middle of this, we're, just sitting there waiting. There's so much of it when this happens that you just don't know what to do. And it's just all so confusing. You get so much information so quickly. The best thing you can do, though, is to get to Children's Advocacy Center. And then, I'm a researcher, so the way I calm myself down is through researching. So I went and started researching, and that's when I found these awful numbers. The
numbers are terrible. They're just terrible. So I love. She's on Instagram, you guys, and I don't know if you're on Facebook, but I know on Instagram at Defend Survivors, and that's how I found her. And one of the things that you talk about, abuse is not love, even if it's from a parent. And I know. And can you tell us a little bit about what you mean by that?
Yeah, one of the things I say is that blood is not thicker than abuse. Somebody's abusing you, that's not love. And I one of the things I hear all the time is people telling a child that that your parent really does love you, and you can't say that and then tell them when they're a teenager that love is not abuse.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you.
Those are two very conflicting messages. You have to tell them the truth. You know, and when we're talking about child sexual abuse, we're talking about something very different than any other type of abuse. And I think that's one of the problems, is that we really don't talk about, you say child sexual abuse, you don't really convey what actually happens. You know, you're talking about somebody that has been usually involves entrapment, coercive control, severe psychological abuse.
Right.
And really, if you look at some of these stories, it's terror and torture. If you really look at what this child, you look at it from the child's eye and what they are experiencing. And many times it really would come down to terror and torture. And we don't recognize, when you say the words child sexual abuse, it does not convey what we're talking about. So you're talking about a perpetrator that is willing to use a child's love to abuse in the most heinous way. You're talking about a perpetrator that would use a mother's trust and a mother's love. You're talking about somebody that would use a pet to control a child. You know, we're talking about somebody that is willing to cross any boundary and willing to do the inconceivable for their own benefit. And I don't think we convey that enough of what a real understanding of what the perpetrators are doing.
Yeah, I think that's really good what you just said. And I think you talk about finding hope. And I think that we want to give people hope, but we don't want to talk about the truth. And I think that it's kind of synonymous with sexual assault, domestic violence, and childhood sexual assault, where we want to give people hope, like it's okay, you'll get better, everything, but we don't want to talk about the truth,
right,
of what that looks like. Because it's not easy. I mean, Paula, for you to come up here and share what your story, and, you know, any survivor to go through and share her story, for your daughter to share her story, where it's not something that you enjoy, but it's something you do in order to give other people hope. Can you hear me?
I lost you for a minute. Sorry.
Okay, you're back.
Yes. No. I agree. You know. Yes. And I mean, my daughter. Yeah. My daughter is amazing, and you know, the same thing. I feel like if she can do that, if she can get up, she got up in front of 1,000 people at Advocacy Center dinner and told her story. And if she can do that, then I can stand up too. And you know, the other thing that, you know, the handprints on the wall at the Advocacy Center. You know, I would take my daughter to counseling there, and they have wonderful counseling. And I mean, if that's the other thing, you need to get with somebody who really understands child sexual abuse. I would sit there and look at those handprints, and, you know, Sarah would too. And I would sit there and look at all those handprints on the wall and think 1% to 2% of these are being prosecuted. And so, you know, I just don't know how not to do something about that.
Yeah. It's like this fire that burns inside of you. It's like 1% to 2%. Yeah. Are you serious? I'm surrounded by a room full of handprints, and only 1% to 2% of those are actually getting vindication for what happened to them. That's kind of, somebody in the chat has shared earlier that, let me see if I can go back, that their dad attacked them and they passed away. Let me see. They went to court and stood up for their kids, but their father ended up getting custody of the children. So we all know that the legal system is there's lots of holes and needs a lot of help. But just listening to you talk today, it's not just it needs help, it needs to change. We know that it's an issue, but action needs to be had behind it.
Right. There needs to be massive change.
Massive change.
This is not a quick, easy fix. This is an overhaul of a system that is not working.
Yeah.
I mean, what other way would we accept a 19 to 29% arrest rate? If we had children being kidnapped and we only 19 to 29% of those got arrested. Yeah. I mean, it's just ridiculous. We wouldn't do that.
And then why is it okay with sexual abuse? Why is that okay? You know,
right.
Why are we? Yeah. And then we ask the children to tell, but then we don't believe them. Even like, I think that's one of your quotes was like, sexual assault, child abuse, and domestic violence. We want them to talk about it, but then when they do, they're not believed, or they're not defended, or there's no charges that are brought against the survivor.
Right. Yeah. Sarah wrote in one of the things that she wrote, she said, "You believe me, you just don't believe me enough."
Ugh. Ouch. Yeah. And what else do I have to do for you to believe me but tell you the truth?
Right. You know? And she also wrote in one of her things, she said, you know, why did you want me to tell? You know, I did what you asked me to do. And why did you want me to tell? Just to empower him and to weaken me. She goes, well, you know, why did you want me to tell? Because everything in her case worked perfect. And it's not just her case though. It's, that's why I'm speaking out about it. It's not just our case, it's not just Sarah's case. This happens over and over. Children walk into advocacy centers every single day. And this just keeps happening. She reported, her mandatory reporter reported, and then we went down this long haul of, at the very end, nothing had happened and nothing had changed. And
that's got to be so frustrating for her and so defeating. And I gave you everything I poured, because it's very vulnerable for them to share what occurred, what happened to them, and then nothing happens in the end.
Right. And along the way, that once you enter the justice system, the abuser gets rights and privileges. He got the DVD of her forensic interview. Once you're in the system, I heard somebody say once that because we have innocent until proven guilty, then that means for the child that they enter the system as lying until proven truthful.
Wow, that's hard. That's horrible.
But that's really what it is. I mean, you ask them to come in, and then once they come in, that's the thing. So many organizations are working on this, and you constantly hear people saying, recognize the signs, tell if you're being hurt, mandatory reporters need to report. We have all these laws going toward this, but then this is what happens when they actually do report.
So let's talk about that. What needs to happen? What needs to change? What's lacking besides obviously this terrible percentage rate of cases that are actually convicted and taken in prosecution?
Yeah, I don't have it written out, but I call it we talked about this a few minutes ago. I call it the triangle of trauma. And on one side of the triangle, you have the abuser telling the child that if they tell, they're not going to be believed. Nobody's going to believe you. You're just going to get in trouble. Mm-hmm. Then on the other side of the triangle, you have organizations that are constantly educating children in schools, laws, everything, telling children, please tell, here's the signs, recognize the signs, and tell if you're being hurt. And then at the bottom of the triangle, you have a justice system where they're going to be told there's not enough evidence to believe you to do anything. And who's in the middle of that triangle is in the middle of all of that. And so, that's the thing, all roads lead to the justice system. All this education that we have, if you educate on the signs, people, educate on the signs, educate children on the signs, they'll recognize it, having organizations reporting, but everything leads to the justice system. And if into the justice system, if you're not defending these kids and you're just dropping them into an abyss, that's just going to cause more trauma. And what's the worst thing that you could do? The worst thing you could do is prove their abuser right. And you have professionals proving that their abuser was right. And that's just the worst thing you could do.
Because the abuser tells a child no one's going to believe you anyway. And then when nothing happens, you're like, I told you no one was going to believe you anyway. That's got to be absolutely gut-wrenching. Yeah, that's horrible.
Right. And then if they're put back in their care.
And they're put back in. You know how many stories I hear like that? They're put back in the home with their abuser.
I hear it all the time too. I've had church officials I've had counselors tell me that they report and the child, nothing happens. Everybody says it's so negative and about mandatory reporters not reporting and everybody not reporting. But a lot of times, they have reported. We have teachers reporting all the time. And I hear teachers tell me that, they're taken out of the home and they're put back the next day.
Wow.
That's one side of it, is the children that are put back in the care. The other side of it is even the children that are not put back in the care, they have to live with wondering where their abuser is now. If they're going to see them, if they're going to come back, that's terror for a child to sit in bed at night and wonder where their abuser is.
Absolutely. Especially because they know nothing, no vindication. They weren't arrested. They didn't go to jail. There's no time. So they're still out there. Like you said, they carry that weight of where are they, but also, oh my goodness, are they doing it to someone else?
Right. And it's also too that another side of that is, I talk about the consequences of a child not defended, and that it's positive for the perpetrator, it's negative for the community, and it's devastating or deadly for the child. We have unfortunately seen where that has happened. The case just recently of the mother, I think it was in Pennsylvania, where report after report, and he wasn't taken care of, and he ended up passing away and being murdered. The other part of this is when a child reports, so many of them, we all know that the majority of them know their abuser. That's one of the things that, sexual abuse, if you've seen any of the information, the majority of them, I think it's like 90% know their abuser.
Okay.
So if they report and then the abuser is not fingerprinted, prosecuted, or anything, then what happens to that community? Fracture. Who are you going to believe? Half of them believe the perpetrator and call the child a liar. In all these sports communities, they're going to fracture. And who is left in the middle of all that damage is the child.
It's a child. And Charles just said it has to be taxing on the child's mental health and ability to form healthy relationship. It has to be. Well, who do I trust? Who do I tell? Who's going to believe me? Even in regular relationships and growing up, it's going to be really hard. I know that you said there's the triangle of trauma, but there's also the triangle of healing and solution.
Right. And the healing and solution is sounds simple, but it's really complicated. But on one side, it's families and communities that believe, protect, and defend the child. And then it's organizations that have policies and procedures that believe, protect, and defend the child. And then the bottom, the justice system that believes, protects, and defends the child. And so, the solution is really putting into place systems that do all of those.
The same. You repeated the same three words for the healing of the triangle of healing. The believe, protect, and defend.
Right.
Believe, protect, and defend. Because the first triangle with the triangle of trauma has the same people in place, but they're not believing, protecting, or defending.
Right. And it has to be all three. You hear so much about believe the child, but you have to believe, you have to protect, and you have to. Everybody leaves off the defend part.
Yeah.
You have to defend them. If we're going to ask them to come in, then we can't let them down when they do. To defend them when they come in. If we tell them to come in, then we have to make sure that they're protected when they do.
And I know we talked about this the other day too.
So the main thing I just hear.
Oh, go. Sorry, it was delayed. Go. It's okay. Go.
No, I lost you. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I know that we talked about the other day, how we talked about how we ask survivors of domestic violence the same thing. Those who are victims, we say, come out, talk about it, stand up, go to court, fight for custody. And in the end, it doesn't matter because most of the time they're not believed. There's no discipline or any ramifications for the abuser. It's the same thing, And so you have to try to go ahead and move on and try to heal, knowing that you did speak up and nothing happened.
Right. And that's what they have to do. They go on and, they go on and with their life, but you can't change, you can't fix that they weren't defended. They had the people that were most supposed to protect them, let them down. And not just let them down, but I think it's just so damaging that they supported the abuser. Doing that, they're building up the abuser. And I think that is just so damaging to the child.
Absolutely.
Power and control. The worst thing you can do is give the abuser power and control, and that's what not defending the child does. It gives control.
And even when you shared that your daughter's videotape was actually given to her abuser, that just blows my mind. Like, why would that even be an option for him to be able to have?
Right. Yeah. No, that is just the biggest betrayal. That you would come in and that what was supposed to be used to protect and to prosecute the case is actually used to hand over to the abuser. So we've been trying to work on a law in where we live to secure the child's personal information.
Absolutely.
The thing, when you come into this, there is no legal representation for the child or for the parent. There's nobody you can talk to about it. I tried to get somebody to defend somebody that had been, I'd lied on that had been in another case and an attorney that had helped with another part of the case previously in the divorce situation. And they kept telling me, you don't need that. She'll have representation. You don't understand. It's like, no, it's not me that doesn't understand. There's no legal representation for the child in this.
Wow.
They need to have a legal representation from the minute they walk in the door to the justice system. Somebody has to be looking out for their rights and their protections.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't have that. even if it goes to prosecution, the prosecutor is still, the prosecutor's for the state. They're supposed to do what they can for the child, but I need somebody specifically looking out for the child's rights.
Yeah, like the garden ad litem. I agree. Jen said a really good point. She said the Gabriel Fernandez documentary is a prime example of no one defending him. And even when you talked about the teacher reporting, all these people reporting, and he was still placed back. People tried so hard to help, but it wasn't taken seriously enough. And that documentary was just gut wrenching. So I want to divert really quickly before we go about, because we know we're in the middle of COVID-19, even though it's ending. We know that kids have been out of school and I used to teach, and during that season, you're a mandated reporter, so sexual assault is happening in the home. And so now the kids are home, a lot of them with their abuser or being exposed to additional abuse or introduced to abuse. And so they've been out of school for 2 months. Now we're back in the summer and they're still in that same situation. So what are your thoughts on that when it comes to additional abuse, when it comes to what they've been experiencing all this time?
Yeah, well, number one, being in lockdown with an abuser, power and control. You just give them more power and control. You cannot think of a more horrific situation than being in a lockdown with an abuser. So my concern though is if we have one of the things we didn't talk about is that only 50% of the cases get investigated. That's the other thing I found. It was just like one statistic after another that were just horrible.
So the other 50% they don't even look into? No,
they get screened out. 50%. And Victor Veith, the child abuse expert, he says it's around 30 to 50%. The statistics I've seen say 50% get investigated, 50% get screened out. I've been told that in our, even with the calls that come into the hotline, that they have different criteria and different operators. Some will push it through, some will not. I've been told that some counselors have to call again and again trying to get a different operator to get a counselor. A licensed counselor can automatically get their case put through. So I was told that 50% even get investigated. When we're talking about sexual abuse, we were talking earlier about the evidence that you have to have. You don't have typical evidence in these cases. It takes a lot of time and money and effort and support, and that's what has to go into the legal system to do these. It takes a lot to investigate these cases, to build a case that has corroborative evidence, not just the physical evidence. And so I know in domestic violence cases, they're talking about evidence-based prosecutions now too, so that you don't have to rely on the victim, and they need to be doing something like that with this also.
Absolutely agree.
But so when we're talking about investigated, it needs a full investigation. It takes a lot of time and money and effort to do these. So, but 50% are getting investigated. 19 to 29% are leading to an arrest. Less than 3% are getting convicted. So my concern is when children are back out of this lockdown situation we were talking about, what's going to happen to those cases? When they do start reporting, when the teachers report, the mandatory reporters report, when that does start happening, if we don't fix, I think this is a time for us to really learn this lesson.
Yeah, absolutely.
We have put children in these situations. How many children that are in lockdown with an abuser right now did tell? How many of those are in the 50% that got their case screened out? So how many people did that? And now when we come back in, if only 50% are going to get investigated and we still have all those statistics, it's just devastation on the child.
Yeah, it is. There's got to be action behind that, because if they've already been placed back with their abuser, now they've been quarantined with their abuser for how many months?
Right.
When they do finally get it to come out to air, go back to school, and so summer camp or whatever, we're asking them to tell, but we're still knowing that the statistics are 50% of them are going to even, going to be looked at, and then the 2% is actually going to come with a solution. So we've got to have some change. We've got to do something as far as this triangle is concerned, from organizations to families and justice that believe, protect, and defend survivors. We've got to, Paula. That's a horrible statistic, especially for children.
Right. And it's all, it's everybody. It's like I said, it's easy to just put all this on the justice system. It's not just the justice system. We have to have the people that believe the child when they say something. How many
from the beginning.
Right. How many times when you see somebody in your community and you see somebody's been arrested and you go look at the comments on Facebook or wherever, and not, so many of the times it's, oh, I just can't believe this. I know this person. They would never do that. You know,
of course.
Everybody says, oh, of course I would believe the child. Of course I would believe the child. But what actually happens the majority of the time is that people stand up for the perpetrator. People say they are against child abuse in abstract, but when it happens to somebody in your community, somebody that you know, the majority of the times they support the abuser.
Yeah.
You know, courtrooms all the time filled up with people supporting the abuser, and a child is sitting there usually. Well, this courtroom is filled up with people supporting the abuser. People will have recommendation letters. So everybody says, I will, you know, I think people, when you say you need to believe the child, people go, of course.
Right.
But it doesn't happen. That's not the way it happens.
Wow. And, you know, Paul, it's no different for domestic violence even. It's like,
right.
Oh, my goodness, I know Johnny. Johnny would never hurt them. You see a murder-suicide. I can't believe it. I wonder what she did. I mean, we could go on forever talking about how people, oh, of course I believe them. All you have to do is tell me. But when they tell you, you know, I read one the other day, well, the closest person to me doesn't believe me. They thought I was stronger than that. Like, what does that even mean? You know, abuse can happen to anybody, but if someone decides to disclose to you whatever type of abuse it is, they deserve to be believed.
Yeah, you do not know what they went through. No. Unless you were there with them and you experienced everything they experienced. That's one of the things I do like to talk about, is that all children react differently. You know, we have all the signs of child sexual abuse, but some children will not have any of those signs.
That's good.
Children all report, when they all report differently. They all act differently. And you will, you know, it's not going to make sense to you unless you had lived exactly what they lived. If you did, it'd make perfect sense with the way they were acting. They survived. And however they survived is what they needed to do. They survived it. And so it's, you know, no judgment. They
did what they needed to do to survive. Same thing, you know, with domestic violence. Well, why did you stay so long? There's a lot of reasons you stay. Why did you, like for a child sexual abuse? Well, why didn't you tell anybody? You know, and then when they decide to tell somebody, you have statistics like this. So I don't know if there's any, hey, Serena, I don't know if there's any additional questions or anything like that. But Paula, thank you so much for joining us. You guys have to follow her on @DefendSurvivors. I mean, she is just a powerhouse.
Thank you.
Yeah, speaking so much truth, advocating for her daughter, advocating for other childhood sexual abuse victims. I didn't even know what was happening to my child until she told me, and then I took action immediately and had them arrested. Awesome. All the counselors and groups I put my kids in.
That's great.
Kids. Said all the counselors and groups I put my kids in believe my kids. It was a court and child services that did it. Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Advocate. I'm telling you, stand up for your child.
Absolutely. All right, you guys. So Paula, thank you so much for joining us. You guys definitely check her out. And change needs to happen, period. You know, we can't ask people that are victims to say something if action is not going to be taken when they do.
Right.
So Paula, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Lisa, so much.
All right. See you later, guys.